The Princess Diarist, by Carrie Fisher. Introduction. Imagine you're 19 years old. You're standing on the precipice of your life, filled with all the insecurity and burning questions that come with that age. Now, imagine you're suddenly thrust into the center of a galaxy, not a real one, but one that feels just as vast and overwhelming. You're on a film set in a foreign country, surrounded by people decades older than you, playing a character who is brave, defiant, and a leader, all the things you're not sure you are. And then, you fall into a secret. A secret with one of the most magnetic, intimidating, and married men on that set. A man 14 years your senior. There are no long conversations, no declarations of love. There is only a quiet, consuming intensity that happens on weekends, in borrowed apartments, and then vanishes completely on Monday morning, leaving you to wonder if it ever happened at all. You can't talk to anyone about it. So, you pour all of that confusion, that ache, and that desperate hope into a diary. 40 years later, those diaries were found. What you're about to hear is not just a behind-the-scenes look at the making of Star Wars. It's a look behind the mask of an icon. Carrie Fisher's The Princess Diarist is one of the most courageous and vulnerable memoirs ever written about fame. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies, not because it dished celebrity gossip, but because it revealed a universal truth, that even the people we see as heroes are, beneath it all, wrestling with the same feelings of doubt, longing, and the profound need to be seen for who they truly are. By the end of our time together, you will understand the immense weight that comes with wearing a crown, even a fictional one. You will learn about the secret love story that shaped a princess, and you will discover the profound lesson Carrie Fisher learned about identity, and how the roles we play can sometimes save us, and sometimes threaten to erase us completely. This is the story of the girl behind the galactic buns. Book summary. To understand the woman who would become Princess Leia, you first have to understand the world she was born into. Carrie Fisher didn't just stumble into show business, she was born in the heart of its brightest, most blinding spotlight. Her parents were Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, known in the 1950s as America's sweethearts. They were the picture-perfect couple, a handsome crooner and a beautiful, bubbly actress. Their life was a fairy tale sold on the covers of magazines. But as a child, Carrie learned a lesson that would shape her entire life: fairy tales are fragile. When she was just a toddler, that perfect picture shattered in the most public way imaginable. Her father left her mother for Elizabeth Taylor, a close family friend. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a national scandal, a feeding frenzy for the tabloids. Suddenly, her family's private pain was public entertainment. She watched her mother, a woman of incredible strength, navigate this humiliation with a grace that masked deep wounds. She saw her father become what she called America's cad, a man more interested in fame, sex, and drugs than in being a father. This experience planted a seed of deep skepticism in young Carrie. She saw show business not as a world of glamour, but as a fickle, cruel machine that built you up only to revel in your fall. It was an occupation that, as she put it, doled out a sense of uneasiness and humiliation like tepid snacks at movie screenings. She watched her mother's star begin to fade, going from big-budget MGM films to nightclub acts in Las Vegas. She heard her own grandmother lament that being Debbie Reynolds used to mean something in this town. And so, Carrie made a promise to herself: she would never, ever go into show business. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At 17, despite her reservations, she found herself on the set of the film Shampoo, starring the legendary Warren Beatty. She hadn't sought it out, but the pull of that world was undeniable. In one of the book's most telling anecdotes, she describes being asked by Warren, the star and producer, whether she should wear a bra under her tennis outfit for a scene. He had her take it off so he could see the difference. She stood there, a teenager, while a powerful man impassively studied her chest and pronounced, "Let's go without." This was her introduction to the industry, a world where her body was a prop, and her comfort was secondary to the vision of the men in charge. She was good in the film, but she still wasn't convinced. She wanted a real life, an escape from the shadow of her parents' fame. So she did what any smart, rebellious teenager would do. She ran away to England to study at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. For the first time, she was on her own, living in a small apartment, away from the judgment and expectations of her family. She was finally just Carrie. And then, a galaxy far, far away came calling. It was Christmas break, and she was back in Los Angeles. She heard about an audition for 2 directors at once. One was Brian De Palma, casting a horror film called Carrie. The other was a quiet, bearded man named George Lucas, who was casting a strange science fiction fantasy. She thought it would be a funny little coup to get the part in Carrie, Carrie as Carrie in Carrie. She walked into the audition room and found the 2 directors sitting behind their desks. George Lucas was, in her words, all but mute. He nodded, and that was it. Brian De Palma did all the talking. She stumbled through her answers, feeling awkward and unimpressive. But something must have clicked with the quiet man in the corner, because she was asked to stay and read for the part of a princess. The scene wasn't about being demure or waiting for a prince. It was filled with authority, confidence, and a strange, formal language. It was a scene about a leader. She read it, and then went home, convinced she'd blown it, convinced she would be returning to her quiet life in London. A few days later, she received the full script. It was called Star Wars, a space fantasy. She called her friend, Miguel Ferrer, another child of Hollywood royalty, and they sat on her bed and read it out loud. And that's when the magic happened. The characters, she said, jumped off the pages. The universe opened up around them. She was captivated by the character she was reading for, Princess Leia, a young woman who was kidnapped by the villainous Darth Vader, tortured, and then, in the original script, was to be found upside down and unconscious with yellow eyes. It was a bizarre, powerful image, and she was hooked. Whoever got this part, she thought, would get to do this. The final audition was with an actor she'd never seen before. A carpenter who had done a small part in one of George Lucas's earlier films. He was handsome, but in a rugged, almost grumpy way. He seemed utterly unimpressed with everything, including her. His name was Harrison Ford. She was so nervous she barely remembered the reading. The following week, her agent called. "They called," he said. And after a long, stomach-churning pause. "They want you." Carrie ran out of her house and into the street. It was raining in Los Angeles, a rare event that felt like a sign. She was Princess Leia. She didn't know it then, but in that moment, Carrie Fisher, the girl who wanted to escape show business, had been cast in a role that she would never, ever be able to leave. "I had never been Princess Leia before," she wrote, "and now I would be her forever." The filming of Star Wars took place in England, which meant she could drop out of drama school without having to leave the country where she'd found her independence. She moved into a friend's small flat and prepared for what she thought would be a 3-month job on a weird, low-budget sci-fi movie. The first order of business was her appearance. The studio told her she had to lose 10 pounds. She was only 110 pounds to begin with, but this was her first taste of the relentless scrutiny she would face for the rest of her career. And then, there was the hair. "The hairstyle," she writes, "would impact how everyone would envision me for the rest of my life." Pat McDermott, the hairdresser, showed her sketches of wild, otherworldly looks. After many failed experiments that made Carrie's round face look even rounder, they landed on the iconic cinnamon bun hairstyle. 2 long hairpieces were practically bolted to the sides of her head and wound into those famous buns. The process took 2 hours. Every single morning. She would arrive at the studio before dawn, fall asleep in the makeup chair, and wake up transformed into Princess Leia. On set, she felt like an imposter. She was 19, insecure, and surrounded by a mostly British, all-male crew. She tried to stay under the radar, hoping no one would notice she hadn't quite lost those 10 pounds. She was handed dialogue that felt impossible to say with a straight face. Lines like, "I thought I recognized your foul stench when I arrived on board. Who talks like that?" George Lucas, a man of very few words, gave her only one real piece of direction. After she delivered a line sarcastically, he pulled her aside and said, very seriously, that for Leia, this was not a joke. Her entire planet was about to be destroyed. Everything she had ever known was about to be gone forever. She was very, very upset. It was a key insight. Leia wasn't just a sarcastic princess, she was a leader carrying the weight of a galaxy on her shoulders, using wit as armor against unimaginable pain. And it was in this strange, isolated world, so far from home, that the central story of this book unfolds. Carrie Fisher spent 40 years keeping a secret. A secret she finally reveals in The Princess Diarist. It was a secret she called kerosene. She went into the filming of Star Wars hoping, in the way a 19-year-old does, to have a glamorous affair. She wanted to appear sophisticated, worldly, like someone who had been around the block a few times. The truth was, she was painfully inexperienced. She'd had one boyfriend. She was, in her own words, awful with men, a certainty she'd carried since her parents' messy divorce. The one man she knew she wouldn't have an affair with was Harrison Ford. He was, first of all, far too old for her, 33 to her 19. He was married and had 2 children. And he was intimidating. His face, she wrote, in repose looked to me like it was closer to a scowl than to any other expression. He was quiet, reserved, and radiated an energy that made her feel clumsy and tongue-tied. He was a man, she was still a girl. They were, she thought, from different leagues entirely. Then came George Lucas's 32nd birthday party. It was held in a dingy room next to the studio cafeteria. The crew, mostly a rowdy bunch of British guys, were there to blow off steam. Carrie, essentially the only girl at the party, became their target. They were determined to get her drunk. She tried to resist, but the people-pleaser in her eventually gave in. The alcohol hit her hard and fast. She became loud, giggly, and the center of attention. At some point, a group of crew members started a joke abduction, trying to carry her out of the party. It was playful, but with an edge of something more serious. And that's when a voice cut through the noise. An American voice. "Where are you taking her?" It was Harrison. He stepped in, not with a smile, but with a quiet authority. A pretend tug-of-war over Carrie turned into a real one. The crew pulled, Harrison pushed back. And in that chaotic, wine-soaked moment, she knew who she wanted to win. Harrison threw her into the back seat of his studio car and told the driver to go. And in that car, on the ride from the studio back to London, something shifted. There was, she writes, unexpected exploratory kissing. It was a prologue, an inkling of what was to come. Later that night, after a group dinner with Mark Hamill and others, Harrison offered to drop her at her flat. He took her arm and walked her to a taxi. Once inside, he pulled her close, and they rehearsed, as she cheekily puts it, the kissing they would be doing on screen a year and a half later in The Empire Strikes Back. He didn't just drop her off. That night began a 3-month affair. It wasn't a romance in any traditional sense. It was a secret kept on weekends. During the week, On set, they would act as if nothing had ever happened. They would be Han and Leia, bickering and bantering, and then on Friday night, they would become Harrison and Carrie, two people sharing a space filled mostly with silence. Her diary entries from that time, which make up the heart of the book, are raw and heartbreakingly beautiful. They are the words of a young woman consumed by an obsessive crush on a man she can't understand and can't talk to. I have filled him in to be unobtainable, disinterested, attractive and bored with my company, she wrote. My ideal mate. Someone to endure, never to enjoy. She was paralyzed by her insecurity. She was terrified of saying the wrong thing, of revealing just how inexperienced and vulnerable she truly was. She desperately wanted him to like her, to see her, but felt that the only way to keep him was to pretend she didn't need him at all. I can charm the birds out of everybody else's trees but his, she lamented in her journal. Their time together was spent at her apartment, usually under the hazy influence of what she calls the brutal strength of Harrison's preferred strain of pot. The marijuana, she confesses, erased many of the specific memories, leaving behind only a feeling of discomfort, of paranoia, of lying awake next to him, trying to think of something to say other than the one thing she really wanted to ask, "Do you love me?" One night, at a pub, she took a risk. She did an imitation of him, his swagger, his bored, disenchanted expression. And to her utter astonishment, he laughed. Not just a smile, but a hard, silent laugh of true amusement. For her, it was a breakthrough. This was the first time I felt as though Harrison liked me, she writes. Not because he wanted to sleep with me. He liked me. I'd made him laugh. But the moment was fleeting. She later let it slip that she'd only ever had one real boyfriend. Harrison's face changed. He seemed disappointed, almost burdened. Decades later, she realized why. Her inexperience meant he was burdened with something very like responsibility. A gift he hadn't wanted or expected. The affair ended as quietly as it began. Harrison finished filming 2 weeks before she did. They flew back to Los Angeles together, sitting side by side in coach for 14 hours. And on that flight, he was kind. He said something to her that she would remember for the rest of her life, the only time he ever acknowledged the intimacy between them. You have the eyes of a doe, he told her, and the balls of a samurai. For her, it was enough. It was the closing of a door on a cinematic episode, both on and off the screen. When Star Wars was released in 1977, it wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural explosion that changed everything. Suddenly, Carrie, Harrison, and Mark were 3 of the most famous people on the planet. None of them, she says, knew how to be famous. The movie misbehaved. It leaked out of the theater, poured off the screen, affected a lot of people so deeply that they required endless talismans and artifacts to stay connected to it, and Carrie Fisher became inseparable from Princess Leia. It wasn't Carrie who was famous, it was the princess. Carrie just happened to look like her. This led to a lifelong, complicated relationship with her own identity. For the rest of her life, she would be asked about Leia, defend Leia, and resent being mistaken for Leia. Who was she, if not this intergalactic heroine? She talks with her signature wit and brutal honesty about the business of fame, a business she calls the celebrity lap dance. Signing autographs for money at conventions, she explains, is a higher form of prostitution. It's an exchange of intimacy for cash. She describes the fans with a deep affection and understanding. They are not just collectors, they are people for whom Star Wars was a life-changing event. They tell her their stories, they come dressed in costumes, they name their children Leia. One of the most poignant moments is when a little girl, dressed as Leia, is brought to meet her. The girl sees this older woman and starts to cry. No, she wails. I want the other Leia, not the old one. It's a funny and heartbreaking reminder of the impossible contract of fame. You are frozen in time for your fans, while your real self continues to age. She reflects on the character that defined her. Leia mattered to her. She was her caretaker, her representative on Earth. She spent her life wishing she'd finally just go away and leave me to be myself alone, but then wondering who I'd be without her. What would she have been, if not Princess Leia? I'd be me, she writes. You know, Carrie. Just me. But the book leaves us with the feeling that there was no just Carrie, the witty, insecure girl who wrote those diaries, the brave actress who stood up to Hollywood, and the iconic princess who inspired millions were all, in the end, different facets of one luminous being. Commentary. When you close the Princess Diarist, you're left with a feeling that's both deeply sad and incredibly inspiring. This isn't a book about spaceships and laser guns. It's a book about the messy, beautiful, and often painful business of being human. The most powerful lesson here is about the search for identity. At 17, you are trying on different versions of yourself, figuring out who you are and who you want to be. Carrie Fisher's journey was that universal experience, but magnified 1,000 times. She was trying to find Carrie while the entire world was screaming Leia. Her story is a profound reminder that the roles we play, whether it's the good student, the rebellious teen, the star athlete, or even a galactic princess, can become a kind of cage if we're not careful. They can overshadow the complex, vulnerable person underneath. But what Carrie ultimately shows us is that we can also make peace with those roles. We can integrate them, find strength in them, and even learn to love them, without letting them define us completely. The second thing that stays with you is her radical vulnerability. In an age of carefully curated social media perfection, Carrie Fisher's willingness to lay bare her insecurities is a breath of fresh air. Her diaries are not polished or pretty. They are the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a young woman in the throes of an unrequited obsession. She felt foolish, worthless, and desperate. And by sharing that, she gives us all permission to be imperfect. She shows us that our deepest insecurities do not make us weak, they make us human. Her courage wasn't just in facing down Darth Vader, it was in facing down her own inner demons and sharing that struggle with the world. So, what can we take from this? First, embrace the power of writing your own story. Carrie's diaries were her lifeline. They were the one place she could be completely honest, the one place she could make sense of the chaos inside her. You don't have to be a famous writer. Just grab a notebook. Write down your fears, your hopes, your confusing feelings. Putting words to your experience is one of the most powerful ways to understand it, and to understand yourself. Second, look at the people you admire with a new sense of empathy. Whether it's a celebrity, a teacher, or a leader in your community, remember that behind the public face is a private person, wrestling with their own doubts and fears. Fame, success, and authority are masks, and Carrie's story reminds us to always look for the human being behind them. This book is a gift. It's funny, it's wise, and it's heartbreakingly honest. Carrie Fisher may be known for playing a princess, but her true legacy is her reign as the queen of telling the truth, no matter how messy it was. That was a summary of The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. We certainly journeyed through the main galaxy of her story today, but I have to be honest with you, a summary is like looking at a star through a telescope. You can see its light, but you can't feel its warmth. The real magic of this book is in Carrie's unique voice, her wit, her vulnerability, and her incredible command of language. This summary is designed to help you decide if her story is one you want to experience firsthand. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or touched your heart, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning about a life, it's an experience that might just change the way you see fame, love, and your own search for who you are. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the world's most fascinating minds. Let's keep growing together.